Here this week for the interview is Jimmy Casas. Jimmy served 22 years as a school leader, including 14 years as principal at Bettendorf High School. And under his leadership, Bettendorf was named one of the best high schools in the United States 3 times by Newsweek and U.S. News and World Report. In 2012, Jimmy was named Iowa Secondary Principal of the Year. 2013, he was the runner-up for the NASP Secondary Principal of the Year. And in 2014, Jimmy was invited to the White House to speak on the Future Ready Schools Pledge. Jimmy is also the author of 8 books, including the best-selling book, Culturalize, Every Student, Every Day, Whatever It Takes. That is going to be our focus today. Jimmy is the owner and CEO of Jimmy Casas and Associates. In January 2020, Jimmy launched his own publishing company called Connect Ed. That is quite the resume, Jimmy. You have a lot going on. I'm excited you're here, so welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it, and looking forward to the conversation today. So thanks again for reaching out. Appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah. Appreciate you having the time to be here. Certainly been familiar with you and your work over a number of years, but you and I have never met. So this is a great opportunity, good excuse to meet, to have a conversation. And we're going to focus on some of the content from Culturalize, I should say. But before we do that, for listeners who may not be as familiar with you or your work, let's start with the arc of your career. Let's highlight for us maybe the professional journey so far and how you ended up here as this sort of prolific author, this prolific speaker. How did you end up here professionally?
Yeah, well, first of all, I started my career as the classroom teacher in Milwaukee Public Schools, teaching bilingual education. I was actually a middle school teacher first. And then good fortune had it, just had some people who, apparently saw some potential in me maybe, and then encouraged me to go back and get my ed leadership degree, which I did at Cardinal Stritch University while I was in Milwaukee. And then I took my first principalship at the age of 26, and then served in that capacity as a middle school principal actually for 3 years, and then went to back to Iowa. And then I was at Iowa City High for 5 years, and then finished my career at Bettendorf, 14 years there. So 22 years in total as a school leader, 26 years in education, still doing the work today. And then, so 5 years ago, it's hard to believe that it's already been 5 years ago that I left the profession. I had the good fortune over the last 3 years as a principal. I also did work as a senior advisor for ICLE, the International Center for Leadership and Education, Bill Daggett's group. And so that's actually how I started my leadership coaching experience, and really liked that a lot. And then realized that maybe this is something that I could do, right? That I could actually branch out. But you know how it is when you're a principal, you're a little nervous about maybe just like leaving your day job or your real job to go start a hustle or a side gig. And so then, of course, was fortunate in 2012 because of the Iowa Principal of the Year, 2013 National Principal of the Year. It actually opened up some other doors, opportunities for me. Opportunities. I've always spoken as part of my work, but that became a little bit more intentional. And then once I did that, then the phone started ringing a little bit more. And so I started speaking and presenting while I was still a principal. And then it just got to the point, I'm sure many people have experienced this, that how do you find the balance between both, right? And so I realized that I could make hopefully a living at the side hustle now. And so I thought, well, worst case scenario is if I'm not successful, I'll just go back and be a principal somewhere. And so, but then Culturalize comes out, and then that takes off, and that gave me the financial freedom to be a little bit more risky. And I've been very blessed. And so for the last 5 years, I've continued to do the work. The first couple of years, honestly, Tom, I was just by myself. And then again, I couldn't keep up with the work. So then I started trying to build a team around me. And that's how we ended up with J. Casas and Associates. And then 2 years ago, apparently I didn't have enough to do, but I had this, vision and this dream of being able to start a publishing company to help other authors like myself achieve their dreams. And so that's been 2 years in the making as well. We're going to 2.5, and I think we published about 11 books. So I feel really good about that as well, and just feel very blessed. So that's pretty much how I ended up here by accident, really, to be honest with you.
It is always interesting when the quote unquote side hustle becomes the main hustle.
Mm-hmm.
Your story is very familiar to me in terms of the evolution of the requests come in, they start to build. Next thing you know, you're having to say no more than you say yes, and you start to wonder whether it's possible to turn again the side hustle into the main hustle, and certainly that's something that's it's like you say, if it doesn't work out, then certainly I can go back and work in the school system. Right. And you really are just risking professional pride and ego, I suppose, because you're credentialed, you have your experience and all of those things. I'm wondering, Jimmy, as you think about your own school experience as a student, and as you went and became an educator, I'm convinced that every educator models themselves somewhat over at least one teacher they had in the past. So as you think about, who you are as an educator today, is there someone from your past, a teacher you had in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, it doesn't matter, but is there somebody that you model yourself after? Is there somebody that inspires you, the way that you kind of go about your business, that you kind of mimic, or not mimic, but I
Mhm.
suppose just model yourself after? Is there someone from your
Yeah.
past like that?
Yeah, I would say there's probably 3 groups, to be honest with you, Tom. I think I always start, when I think about that, I think back to honestly, my elementary school years. I was blessed to have a kindergarten teacher, first grade teacher, second grade teacher, and really a fifth grade teacher who really just, I love going to school because I love them, to be honest with you. I mean, I just
Mm,
think they made me feel really important. I think they loved me, and that's, I appreciate that, and I've always remembered that, right? And so those people are still very dear to my heart, even today, as they're retired today, and they're all living, and I know them all well, and we follow each other on social media and all those types of things. So
right.
that's certainly an impact. I didn't have a good middle school experience, to be honest with you. As a high school experience, it was okay, to be honest with you. But that one individual would probably be my assistant principal, Kelly Morgan, who I talk about in Culturize. Right, there's a
Yeah.
true champion. Right, there's a person who really had every reason to quit on me, to resent me, to get just exhausted of me because I gave him every reason, and yet he wouldn't quit on me, right? Which eventually turned into one of my core value,
Right.
definitions of being a champion for kids. And
Hmm.
and so definitely he's somebody I hold dear to my heart. Still a good friend of mine today. I love going back home and seeing him and golfing with him, and just a great man in my opinion. And then even Dr. Dan Donder, who was one of my professional mentors, who I catch myself emulating him sometimes, whether it's him or Lucia Murtaugh or Bill Andrikopoulos. These people that were very instrumental in my career professional growth, right, are people that I still continue to look up to today. So
That's I think that's rare that you are like, so many of us have just lost touch with teachers we've had, or principals or assistant principals, et cetera. And the fact that you're connected to so many of the educators from your past must be it must be unique for you to have that perspective, and for them to see kind of where your career has gone. So that's a very interesting, that and very cool that you have that connection to educators from your past, and they can see how you've grown into the job as well. And I'm sure they're very proud of what you've done, and because of their influence on you as well. So now
yeah,
let's start with
they
oh
tell me
yeah,
that, Tom. They're proud of their
yeah.
little Jimmy, right? Their little Jimmy. Right?
Little Jimmy, yeah. And I think you'll probably always be their little Jimmy, right? I mean, that's just how
Yeah.
it works, as we get older.
Well, I even tell the
Uh,
story, Tom, when I took my first principalship. I remember calling, like, obviously I called my parents first, right? And then I
yeah,
called Kelly Morgan, right? Mr.
yeah.
Morgan, because it's hard for me to
Mr.
call him Kelly
Morgan.
Morgan, right?
I know.
So I call Mr. Morgan, and I tell him I said, "Hey, we're colleagues now."
Yeah.
And there's a dead silence on the end of the line, right?
That's
And
right.
he says, "Oh crap," right? But he didn't say crap, right?
No. Yeah.
But anyway, it's that idea of, obviously he's very proud of me. But yeah, it's really
Yeah.
weird, right? To think
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
here as a senior, I'm expelled from school, and
Yeah.
literally, 7, 8 years later, we're
Yeah.
colleagues, right?
Okay, you're gonna have to tell us that story, Jimmy. Senior expelled from school. Let's before we get it. You can't drop that on
No,
us right
that's
now and
what
have us.
happens when you're disconnected, right? When you're
Yeah.
not connected, right? And you
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
you don't want to be there. You're looking for a way out, and
Right.
honestly, you don't like school. And this experiences that we have, right? We run across a lot of students who
Yeah.
don't feel connected, that don't feel like they belong there, and you're looking for a way out, and you feel kind of hopeless. That you just eventually give up, and your parents won't let you quit school, so you have to finagle it, manipulate it. So what you do
Right.
is you do something bad enough to get yourself expelled from school, thinking, well,
Mhm.
this is my way out. And yet here comes Mr. Morgan again, champions for me again, and
Mhm.
helps my parents navigate a system that they don't just understand. They just don't understand an education system. Neither one of them are
Right.
formally educated. So
Yeah.
he goes to bat for me, which I'm sure was really risky on his part, right? To do that and to
Mhm.
go advocate to the board to say, hey, this young boy needs to be in school, right? I know he did
Yeah.
something not good, but he needs to be in school, and here's why, and then
Yeah.
gets me back, right? And
Yeah.
so that's a great man right there, right? So
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to imagine the conversation. Hey, Mr. Morgan, do you not understand what I'm trying to do here? Will you stop? Will you cut that out? Stop advocating for
no,
me.
it's more being in his office, just bawling my head off, just saying, just let me go. Don't you
Right.
understand? I hate being here, right?
That's
It's
right.
a little
I have
different,
a
right?
I have a plan here, Mr. Morgan.
Yeah,
It's
you're
so
messing
funny
it
too.
up.
It's so funny how we can't, and I've experienced this on the other end. I'm sure you have as well. I've met with former students of mine who are full adults now working as teachers, and they still call me Mr. Schimmer. I'm like, it's okay. You can call me
Yeah.
Tom. And they have a hard time doing that. It's so ingrained in us. So
Yeah.
I
I
think
still call him
we
Mr.
could tell
Morgan.
those stories forever. I know, Mr. Morgan, there's no way to get around that. So let's dig into the content now. Let's talk about school culture. I think everyone, and certainly by everyone, I mean, teachers, administrators, families, students, everyone knows that developing a positive, supportive school culture is essential to maximizing the opportunity each and every learner has to reach their potential. But my question is, how do we know that we've developed that kind of school culture? How do we measure it? What are some metrics that we can look at that would indicate that we've culturized our school?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always going to be a challenge, right? When you start looking at like qualitative data versus quantitative data, like how do you actually measure it, and how do you even know what it is actually attributed to, right? I think that's the challenge for all of us. And so one thing when I look at school culture, Tom, first of all, I just look at the way people behave in the organization. So that's how I look at it in my head, first of all. Constantly I get people, hey, Jimmy, what's one thing that I can do to impact my culture right away in a positive way? And I could answer that question many ways, but one thing I always tell them is you're already seeing it wrong. You're trying to identify one thing, and it's not one thing, it's everything, right? It's everything we do. But start with the way and looking at how people behave. How are you behaving? And how are people in the organization behaving, right? And so that's certainly an area where I begin. The second part is all based on the foundation of relationships, because those relationships foster trust, they foster empathy, right? These are all attributes that we need in our organizations in order to really help students achieve at high levels, to create an environment where people want to be a part of it. And so that's the challenge for always, is like, how do I actually measure that? And so obviously we do a lot of qualitative, right? So it's more like, well, tell me how you feel. What has it done? It helps me feel connected. I built confidence. I feel capable, right? So these other ways of measuring it. But to me, when I look at culturized, Tom, one of the overarching, there's really 4 premises to that. And one of those is to understand the overarching theme of culturized is to understand that we have to see the culture through the eyes of others, right? It's not my eyes. It's what are the experiences that others are having, and how do we help them help us, right? See what we don't see. And so the idea is that then what are the ways that we can do that? So how do I begin to see the culture of my classroom, not through my eyes, through the eyes of my students? How do I see the culture of the building through the eyes of the staff, right? And so there's where we can begin to do practical ways of doing that. So I'm a big believer, number one, is to truly measure the culture of a classroom. In my opinion, teachers need to see it through the students' eyes. That means I need to sit down and begin to ask questions. What do you love about this classroom, right? How is second grade different than first grade? How is biology different than chemistry, right? What is one way that, why do you look forward to coming to class? What if you became the teacher today, what's the first change you would make and why, right? In other words, they're telling you things that you don't see. And I'm a believer that we believe a culture's here, but there's really this subculture underneath that culture. And I call that subculture the undercurrents, right? That's what I see. We create those undercurrents. Teachers create them in the classroom, building principals create them in the building level, superintendents create them at the district level. We don't mean to, but we do. And so if we had practical ways and allowed other people to help us see that, then we could avoid the undercurrents. And those undercurrents are exhausting, right? That's where we're chasing. We're cleaning up our messes. We're having to constantly give more time to something that I don't have time to give to, right? And it's usually not fun time. It's usually stressful, or it's confrontational, or whatever happens to be the case. So it's really the key of being intentional and sitting down with people and asking them, hey, this is an idea I have, and I want you to help me see what I don't see. If we were to do this, what is this going to create for us? Where is the undercurrent going to come from? What is this going to do to our staff? What is this going to do to kids? Is it a fair practice? Are we asking people to do too much? Whatever that is, allow others to help you see that. So you're going to have to be really intentional and sitting down with people and just asking them. And the more you do that, the more trust you build, the more they'll tell you. If they hesitate to tell you, well, then we really haven't built those relationships right enough for them to trust us to tell us. And so all these are interconnected. It's not one thing, it's many things.
Yeah, there's certainly no way to spreadsheet your way to measuring culture, but certainly it's important to know that to seek the information, right? So that
Absolutely.
you can gauge where people are and what they're thinking. Because otherwise, I mean, that undercurrent, as you say, is going. It exists in the school. It exists in the classroom. It exists everywhere throughout the school. We have to access it and try to access it in an authentic way that allows that trust and that relationship to grow so that you do get that honesty so that you can address some of the issues that might be festering because what is the opposite of that if we don't address, like, from your perspective, if we don't do that, what are some of the major concerns that we should have about not seeking that information? Do we just get a false sense of what our school is like? Do we have, you know, resentment building? What for you
Absolutely.
are the ramifications of not seeking an understanding of those undercurrents?
Yeah, immediately people feel they don't have a voice, right? They're
Right,
not
right,
invested, right? We start
right.
unintentionally creating a culture of compliance, right? That's not good.
Hmm.
Now
Right,
people are doing it because, well, I have to, because if I don't, there's going to be some sort of retribution, or it's going to be my evaluation, or the principal's going to try to get rid of me. And
right.
so that all starts impacting morale, right? And so now we
Hmm.
just have these constant negative undercurrents run through organizations. And I know
Yeah,
you've experienced it. I know you're in schools all the time. I know you hear the
yeah.
complaints, right?
Hmm.
Those are the undercurrents, but the principal's not trying to create those undercurrents, right? They just don't see it. They don't have a process to even understand where the
Right.
undercurrents are at. And that's why it's important that we foster those relationships, that we're intentional in that. But we have to give people our time, right? To be a champion means, number one, do not quit on your people, whether it's your students or your staff. That means you got to be fair to them. You got to treat them with dignity, with respect, with compassion, with empathy. People want to be great. You got to believe that. That's core principle number four.
Right.
But also in core principle number one, to be a champion means you got to be intentional in giving your time to others. I think it's one of the most precious commodities that we can give to others. My gift of time to you means I care. I care enough to come seek you out. I care enough to ask, and I care enough to invest time to help and support you and guide you and be there for you, or whatever it happens to be. But at the end of the day, oftentimes we are waiting for something to happen before we go invest our time. And sometimes it's a little late. So if
Hmm.
we can already predict, see the undercurrent that we have a staff member who is struggling, or is negative, or is perceived to be toxic, right? We've labeled these people. Well, then I better invest more time on the front end to build a relationship. So when something does happen, that isn't my first interaction with this person, whether
Right.
that's a teacher, whether that's a parent or a family, or whether it's a student. And if I can do that as a school leader, then I'm modeling really good practices for our teachers to do the same thing. Don't wait for an
Right.
issue to contact a parent. Contact a parent and start building a relationship, knowing that at some point you will have an issue, probably. And that
Right.
should not be our first interaction. Mhm.
Absolutely. That's that idea of the proactive communication and just sort of getting connected so that when you have to make those phone calls, and it is when, not necessarily if, you will at
Correct.
some point
You
have to
will at
make
some
those phone
point.
calls.
That's right.
That's right. You know, I've used an expression for years that in talking about teachers and students, you know, and basically adults and kids, I would say what adults give their attention to, and I think you could substitute attention for time. What adults give their time to is what children or teenagers eventually come to believe is important.
Mhm.
And I think we could say the same thing about principals. What principals give their time and attention to is what teachers will eventually come to see what matters to you. And the idea that you're asking the questions, you're seeking to understand the undercurrents, you're trying to come up with resolutions and trying to see how people are feeling in terms of the work. I think by being intentional about that, the undercurrent's going to evolve regardless
Mhm.
of what you do. The question is whether that undercurrent is going to be one of positivity or one that
Right.
sort of drags the
Or
culture down.
how deep that undercurrent is, right? Because I always say,
Right.
all our schools have undercurrents, right?
Of
Our
course.
businesses, organizations, our homes, our families,
Yeah.
but the more dysfunctional it is because that's the deeper the undercurrent. That's the depth
Right.
of that undercurrent, which down here is not good. You're going to
Not
get
good.
beat up. You're going to spend a lot of time. You're going to start getting, upset and frustrated,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
now we're wallowing down here, but we don't
Right.
realize that. Well, we're contributing most of those issues ourselves. We just don't
Yeah.
know it.
Yeah. It's
So,
divisive. It's the blame game. It's the
yep.
frustration. All of that starts to emerge when that
Mhm.
undercurrent gets that deep. Now, one of the core principles in Culture Eyes is to carry the banner. And this was an interesting concept because I want to clarify something because you write in the book that quote. Staff must harbor a deep adulation, sense of honor, and deep regard for the schools and districts they work for. Now, this can, end quote. So, this for me can sound potentially like a bit of that modern political atmosphere where it's like at all costs toe the party line. And that can also feel as if dissent or challenge or tough debates are unwelcome in a school, when it's like, hey, you have to have a deep adulation for our school. That's so that if I disagree with my principal, that somehow I'm being negative or I'm being detrimental to the culture. So help us draw the line here, Jimmy, between, say, for example, a classroom teacher, the line between having a deep adulation for the district, the school, etc., but also being able to express myself authentically without being dismissed or marginalized or labeled as being negative. Where's that line for all teachers or principals when it comes to a district?
Yeah, Tom, I don't know if you can relate to this, but do you ever write a book and then you read it over and over and over and you feel like it's right where you want it to be, and then about a year later you read it again like, crap, I should have put this and made it a little bit more clear, right?
Yes. Yes. The answer
There
to
you
that
go.
question, Jimmy, is
There
yes.
you go. That's the growth, right? That's our growth,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's our opportunity to go back and continue to work on it. So let me again, first of all, remember that the core values. First of all, let me say this: I wrote them for me.
Yeah.
It was my way of holding me accountable to be more of an effective leader. That's how this started, right?
Okay.
Number two, that the core values all interrelate, right? It's a framework for me. So when I have to deal with an issue or have to go work with a student or a family, or even in my own personal relationships, I can quickly go to a core value and I'll frame it up differently, which hopefully means that I respond more appropriately in a more compassionate, effective way that gets me a better result. Okay. So that's where I kind of start with this.
Yeah.
Carry the banner has a meaning. And in the book, I didn't go deep enough to really explain, and I didn't realize this until later, but it's fine. I mean, I still talk about it all the time, so I just do it now. So number one is, yes, it means to be a positive voice. It means I need to carry the banner for my school, my principal, my students, my family, my faculty, whatever. So I'm going to be a positive voice in that. That's one thing, but it also has a second meaning, and this is where I wasn't very clear, but it's to create experiences for others through my interactions that when those individuals walk away from me, they carry the banner for Jimmy Casas, or they carry the banner for my school, or they carry the banner for whatever, right? When Tom Schimmer and I have an interaction here, I want it to be so positive that Tom Schimmer carries the banner for Jimmy Casas, right? Tom Schimmer wants Jimmy Casas to carry a banner for Tom, so Jimmy Casas can say, well, you should go on Tom's podcast and you should learn from Tom and Tom's, because there's value in that, right? There's a relationship, there's a connection, right? So that's part of it too. So going back to what you said, the idea that they're interrelated means this. When I say that we want to create this type of environment, then that is my responsibility from number one, from the very beginning, to model that same experience for this individual. But there's other components to it, right? Because we know these are really complicated concepts that aren't just, we'll do this and this will work. It doesn't work that way. So one concept, for example, is the why. You know, it's not the why of Simon Sinek, why did you become a teacher, right? Although that's one of the three whys that I talk about all the time. But it's also the why of why do people behave the way they behave, and why are we doing this? So part of my job is to bring clarity that one of the expectations that I think all of us should have in education is that we should have an expectation for others to be careful to understand that we need to carry the banner for our profession, for our children, which means we don't speak negatively about our children outside the school, right? We can call it a non-negotiable. I call it an agreement or a value. We can't say we value children, we love children, we'll champion for kids, and then I go out and talk negatively about kids. So it is my responsibility to create the environment by, first of all, modeling it to the teacher, right? Which means I'm going to do the same thing with that teacher that I want them to replicate with our kids. And so to me, clarity of expectations, I'm not saying everybody has to agree with them. And I'm not even saying everybody has, if they choose not to, that's okay. But that is still my expectation. And when we are building principles, part of it is to be clear in our expectation and hold people to those high expectations, because we can't talk about excellence, in my opinion, Tom, and then go behave in ways that aren't excellent. Because then what happens is that we all lose credibility. In other words, it's just words about words. These values that we hang up in our schools, our little mission statements, and don't mean anything because we don't even model them ourselves. And so we're all hypocritical. We lose. So the idea again is if I create an environment where somebody sees that as, well, either this or this will happen to you, then I've already violated my own core value. So part of it is an expectation, but if they're not meeting that expectation, where am I going to begin with this? Well, why aren't they meeting the expectation? Because I believe they want to. To me, that's core value number 4 again, right? So I'm
Right.
always using those 4 core values. So I think you ask a very good question, right? But if I create an environment that it's an either or if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen to you. Well, I've already violated my core principles, right?
Right.
You're right. I'm going to be pretty ineffective and I'm not going to have a positive culture. So I can't violate my own core values. And so that's why I started back here. We have to understand that if we're going to create those core values and we're going to talk about them, well, I don't care what you say. I want to see you live them.
Right.
And that to me is how it begins.
As I read that in the book, the way that I made sense of it for myself was the fact that you can simultaneously carry the banner while also having a very rich dialogue and debate. In other words, what I'm carrying the banner for is a school and a principal in a district that values everyone's perspective. Even if we disagree, there's open, honest, professional conversations about the direction we're going. So that even, like I say, if we disagree or if there's dissent or some sort of conflict in that way, it's handled professionally, it's handled respectfully. Everyone has a voice. We've created that kind of undercurrent, if you will, that allows everyone to have an equal voice at the table. So that's how I made sense of it. But I do think that there's the possibility that if you're not thinking and processing that closely, we don't necessarily want to just say you have to toe the company line or you have to toe the party line. I like the way, or out, yeah, and I love the way that you sort of talked about, living those values and modeling that for everybody and being open and honest about that. Another core principle you write or talk about is, and you've mentioned this a few times already, is expecting excellence, right? And we know that this pandemic has been an acutely intense situation that has forced all educators to prioritize social and emotional well-being of our students. And there's no question that mattered early on in 2020, of course, in mid 2020. But what I see now when it comes to the idea of social emotional learning, I don't see this everywhere, but it's enough to notice, is that SEL and the emotional support of learners is coming in some places at the expense of actual academic achievement and actual academic learning. So I'm wondering about your perspective, because I know a lot of people will assert this idea that you have to Maslow before you can bloom. But I always feel strongly that it's Maslow through Bloom, that it's your social emotional well-being really is at the core, your achievement and your ability to learn and overcome and go through all of that. I mean, save any kind of extreme situations, of course. So I think that real confidence comes from, this grounded expectation of academic success. So I'm wondering about how leaders can, especially during these incredibly stressful times and these emotional times like the pandemic, how do leaders create and therefore maintain a culture of excellence in their school, both for us professionally, but also a culture of excellence for students?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with you, right? I don't think it's an either or, right? And very few things in our profession are an either or, right? I'm not an extreme person. Like, I don't think it's here or here, right? I think there's a lot that goes into all those things, and I think it can be both, right? Many times. And so, number one is we go back to the core value of expect excellence. What does that mean, right? And the idea is what we model is what we get, right? So what we're doing is we're trying to create experiences. Again, we're being very intentional that we're not going to ask others to do something in our organizations that we're not doing ourselves. So this is where being a champion is all about relationships. Expecting excellence is all about modeling, right? And I do agree with you, right? And that is a concern. Obviously, you as well as I, when we're in the buildings, we're seeing a lot of this, right? So what happens, right? This pandemic comes along and our teachers, they do what they think they're supposed to do, right? Which they think, oh my God, I have to really take care of the social emotional learning needs of my students. And so our teachers are just exhausting themselves by going almost, now they're reacting and they're going almost to the extreme of they're forgetting about the academics and focusing on the social emotional learning well-being of our children, right? Again, nothing wrong with that. I get it. No, we don't judge that. And thank you for doing that. But in doing so, you're right. Somewhere along the way, we stayed there. But I also believe the teachers started exhausting themselves too. So principals began to see this. And so they jumped in and started doing the same thing for the teachers, right? Hey, don't worry about the lesson plans. Hey, don't worry about, the test scores. You just take care of the kids. And now they're trying to take care of the teachers, right? And so we kind of created this little system between teacher and student and then principal and teacher. And so one of the things I always worry about, well, who's taking care of the principals, right? And so then we got the superintendents, right? And so this is all interrelated a little bit. But the key to me, you're right, is this is why I believe it's never an either or. In hindsight, we can go back, and that's why I'm not critical. I'm not in a school anymore, right? I don't judge people. I've been a principal for 5 years, right? An active principal. And so I'm not in it every day. I get to go into a building, spend a day or 2 days or a week with the principal, and then I leave, right? They're stuck with the problem. So, but it is something that I say to them, hey, one area that there's a potential undercurrent that we have to be really careful is at the end of the day, ultimately, we're still responsible for academic growth and helping our students achieve and continue to move forward. So how are we going to be more intentional in doing that so we don't stay over here off kilter and all we're doing is taking care of the needs and it's saying, well, we don't need to hold them accountable and they don't need to grow and all that stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're still held accountable for, and that's how we're going to be measured. And so, yeah, we had a hiccup there for a year and some blended in the second year, but here's been my experience, Tom. Schools that already had a healthier culture, okay, that's how I'm going to frame it up. I don't think went down that path as much. They started a little bit, but they still continue to move forward. And I'm in some of these schools, and I've seen that their academic progress, it had a little hiccup, right? A dip, but then it came back and it's got, either steadied out or plateaued, or some continue to rise a little bit, right? But other schools, right? And then here's my concern. They now blame the pandemic. And that's what I get concerned about. That no, that's a pretty easy cop out for us, because now we don't have to hold ourselves accountable for any of this. No, this is why culture is so critical to the work that we do in our schools. Unhealthy culture, when faced with a crisis, when faced with a significant challenge, is in trouble, because what it does is exposes our weaknesses and our lack of empathy and compassion and all those types of things, and even sometimes our high expectations. And so again, that's my concern a little bit. So my point to that would be is that we have to be intentional and being very clear. It goes back to the why. Why is this important, right? That we do this. How are we going to do that? And what is my role in helping making sure that that happens, right?
Right.
And so again, it's a constant reframing. That's what I call it. It's a constant reframing to helping our people move forward, so they don't fall back and get stuck in, yes, it doesn't have to be either or. Continue to take care of these, but at the same time, part of that is helping kids achieve, so it continues to build their confidence, right? That impacts their social emotional well-being. If we're investing time, they're connected. That makes them feel right. If they feel capable, right? All these things. So again, it's not an either or, but I do like the way you phrase that. It's a whoop, right?
Yeah.
Right there together. So anyway, those are my thoughts on it.
No, I appreciate that. And certainly, I always say to people, look, I draw a really thick line between what happened in the spring of 2020 when it was shock and awe, and we didn't know what this pandemic. I will not critique anything anyone
I'll give you those
did.
3 months, right? I'll give you those 3 months. Yeah.
Going into the fall, I think what's happened in some places is things have become a new habit. And what I see from an assessment perspective is I see a lot of students, or at least I hear from teachers who say that more than ever, students feel like they don't have to do anything, that there's a level of apathy that's kind of set in. And I think we have to take some responsibility for that by continuing or perpetuating the idea that there was no expectation of performance. And I think you're absolutely spot on. What happens in a pandemic or any stressful situation, it's a magnifying glass. It magnifies whatever your culture is, will get magnified under those stressful situations, and it will get exposed, and you'll start to see that. It's not irreversible, and certainly your core principles would help schools and leaders sort of lead that work and getting the culture back to where it needs to be. But certainly that's my concern, is that we have to keep our eye on the level of excellence, and you can become almost over the top with being so or swing the pendulum, if you will, is probably a better way of expressing that, to the SEL side, that we forget about the academics. And I think there's so many who remind that it's Maslow through Bloom. It's not Maslow instead of Bloom. Can we finish up now talking, because I love this part, because I speak a lot about this when it comes to assessment, about assessment building hope and efficacy, as well as measuring achievement, that there's a human being on the other end of it. And of course, one of the other core principles in Culturize is being a merchant of hope. It's your contention that it's everyone's duty to foster a culture of hope, trust, and personal investment. And I agree with that. Like I said, one of my core principles as well in assessment with my colleagues and I. We talk a lot about hope and efficacy when it comes to assessment and the emotional impact and the hopefulness and all of that. So that said, that idea, I'm interested in how you define hope. When it's one of those things where everybody talks about hope, but how do you define hope? How do I know that a student is maintaining hope, and what are the specific things we can do to build that hope in our students?
Mhm. Well, first of all, again, to be a merchant of hope for me, the way I defined it was two ways. Number one is that everybody deserves to be a part of something great, right? Everybody deserves to have those opportunities, to have those experiences. And even more so, how do we create an environment where everybody has an opportunity to actually leave their legacy in some capacity, right? In other words, to leave their impact. I think we all went into the profession, Tom. I mean, I'm not sure that I'm sure there's some exceptions somewhere, but for the most part, I think most of us went in the profession because we wanted to make a difference. We wanted to make an impact. We believed, right? We believed that we had something to offer that could help others.
Right.
Many of us had that service mentality, right? That servant leadership mentality. And so the idea is everywhere I go, especially right now, I can go into some states and they're given transformational grants, right? To transform teaching and transform learning, to transform grading, right? Whatever happens to be the case. But the problem is, in my opinion, is we're talking again about transforming these ideas, but yet I run across people who haven't transformed this. In other words, I don't really think they believe they can do it, right? They don't believe every kid can do it. That's for sure. I hear this all the time, right? You do too, I'm sure.
Yep.
But we also do the same thing to adults. So I'm a big believer, first of all, you got to transform this. You got to believe that you can actually make a difference. You got to believe that. And I talk a lot about going back to the interview chair, right? You go back and sit in that interview chair and you tell me what you said when you sat in that interview chair. I'll tell you what you said. That you believe in all kids. You believe all kids could learn, right? You talked about how you want to make a difference. You talked about how you would never quit on kids. You talked about why you became a teacher. And now here we are 2 years, 5 years, 7, 12, 24, 34 years later. And our conversation in that interview, right? What we talked about, what we believed in, our behaviors today don't mirror that anymore, right? And the question is why? I don't know, but that's going back to those 3 whys. That's where I always stay as one of my frameworks is I'm always wondering, well, what happened to them? Why? Why don't they believe this anymore? And how do we get people to go back to that interview chair? Because I think that's the real person. That's where I believe that core value number 4 says, no, Jimmy, everybody wants to be great. They sat in that interview chair. They wanted to make a difference. So what has happened to them? And this is personal for me because I too lost my way, right? I became that person I never wanted to become, right? I became a little resentful, not really believing that all kids could do it, right? Taking it personally. Yeah. And so I became someone I never wanted to become. So that core value for me was for me personally, but also to remind me that, Jimmy, don't judge these people. You became the same person. So inside that person is somebody who really wants to be great. You have to give them the hope that they can find themselves out. And so one of my charges was, Jimmy, you got yourself out. Or with the help of others, help these people get out, because that will inspire you to believe that you can do it with everybody. And that's why I say these aren't perfect formulas, Tom. And I'm very transparent about that. Hey, nothing is perfect in this world. There's no guarantees. But I will say this, that if you begin to see it through a different lens and you change you, in other words, this is about you becoming a better version of you, you change the way you approach this, you change that, you will get a better result. You will get a better result. And I do believe that. And I can almost guarantee that in every case. And so the idea is to believe that everybody wants to be great, but I'm also not a magician. It's not my job to save people and it's my job to reflect on my own behavior, bring my best version to this individual and be all in. And I may not make a difference and they still may not get to where I want them to get to, but it isn't because I didn't believe that they could. Right. And that's how we have to see it. In other words, an easy example is this. Don't tell me you're going to go talk to this student or this teacher, but it ain't going to make a difference, Jimmy. I'll go talk to them, but I'm telling you, it ain't going to make a difference. That's just the way this teacher is. That's the way this kid is. That's the way this family is. Yeah. Well, then don't go talk to them because it's hypocritical. It's disingenuous. Believe it. Believe it first, because if you don't, they'll know it right away. Yeah. And so to me, hope is about believing in others. It's not necessarily define it, but believing that others want to be better and want to be great because at some point they did.
Right.
And so how do we help them find that back again? How do we help them make them become better versions of themselves? So
Yeah,
that's how I would define it.
that mindset is so powerful. I think one of the most lethal expressions in education is, "You don't understand, Jimmy. Our kids can't do that." That is an absolute, because if you say that, they probably won't.
They
and
won't.
and
There's no way.
our collective ability to help all learners reach high levels of intellectual performance, social competence, all of that, it starts with our mindset, mentality. That doesn't guarantee, as you say, it's not a magic trick.
Right.
It's not a guarantee, but at least we have to operate under that principle.
That's right.
I really appreciate that. 2 questions left as we finish up here today, Jimmy. These are 2 questions I ask everyone who comes on the podcast. Here's the first one, and you could take this in any direction you want to go, but the question is simply, educationally speaking, what keeps you up at night?
Well, heartburn.
Educationally
really
speaking,
honest,
Jimmy. Yeah, educationally speaking,
oh,
not
okay.
yeah,
My bad.
not the stages of life.
I forgot about that part. Old age.
Old age, that's right. Blurry vision.
No.
I don't know. What are we talking about?
Yeah. I don't know if it keeps me up at night, but certainly it worries, right? And right now, it's what's happening, nationally across. So here's what I'd say. Again, I don't expect people to agree with me, right? These are just my personal opinions on things.
Sure,
but
of course.
Number one is, I would say this, is I think our profession has always struggled with a little bit of a stigma, is that I feel like our profession has never felt valued enough, that we've never been paid enough, that people don't appreciate us enough, right? And we always had this bond between us that we felt like the outside was not respecting us as profession, right? Mm-hmm. And we saw this little turn here at the pandemic where parents started realizing, oh my God, I have no idea. I want these kids to go back to school because I can't deal with this. I don't know how you do it, right? And then we saw it turn again, right? Where it turned again. And this is just crazy, right? Yeah. My thing that bothers me now, probably more than anything, is I do worry about our profession overall. What's the long-term impact and what's the recovery time for people to take pride in wanting to become an educator, to be a teacher, to be a principal? And part of the issue I see now that worries me, in the past, maybe not as bad, but now with social media and everything and the influence that people do have, I do worry about our profession. If we continue to complain about how terrible this profession is and how we're underpaid and how no one appreciates us, and we continue to share that narrative, then I wonder who's going to want to be a teacher, Tom. Yeah. I wonder who's going to want to be a principal. And I think we have to be really careful about that. And I think we can still say, hey, these are some things, concerns, so here's what we're working on. But I feel like we've gone so far to the extreme of, if I see one more post about somebody crying themselves to sleep tonight because they're so exhausted and because no one appreciates, no one's going to want to become a teacher. And I think we're already seeing this, right? We've already seen the reports coming out from different universities about the number of students going into the education profession, almost 50% reduction in the last 10 years. And that scares me. And this pandemic has not helped, because I do think people now, and I get it, I think this is what people are feeling. I believe that. I think it's real. All I'm saying is quit sharing that with the world, because I don't show how we convince our next generation to go, come do this job, when that's the narrative we keep sharing. So that's what I would say worries me.
It's such a good point, because we've always fought for credibility, status within society from the external world. But if inside the education world now you're also hearing these grievances being aired, and there is also a little bit of that sensationalism that we're susceptible to when it comes to social media, for sure, and maybe over dramatizing some of it. And I'm not trying to be dismissive of what people are feeling, but certainly I think you bring up a good point that we need to be champions for the profession. We've got to be careful, for sure. Okay, last question as we finish up today, Jimmy. It's a question about success. It's a question I ask everyone again, and it's simply, if a random person stopped you on the street, you can talk about this personally or professionally or however you want to go. If a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what is your definition of success? How would you answer them?
Yeah, I saw the question, Tom. This is a tough one, right? Because I think you go many different directions. But I think that at the end of the day, I just go back to my why, right? Like, I know my why, and I've known it for the last 17 years. I really have, because I lost my way. I already told you that earlier, right? I was one of those people who started losing hope and became what I call an awfulizer, right? And blaming other people for my own shortcomings, right? And so today my why is I truly go into every situation, every relationship, every conversation, every school I work with, every interaction, whatever, is to believe that my why is to inspire others to believe that they can be more and do more than they ever thought possible. That's what I try to do. I try to inspire people to say, no, you can do that. You can be that, right? And so then I look at those 3 C's from Culturize, right? So I try to do that by first making a connection, right? Making a connection, helping people, right? Build their confidence. And then if they build the confidence, then maybe they feel capable. And so how do I define that? I guess I go back again to, my own responses. I mean, I feel like I know my impact because I just know it because of the interactions and relationships that I have with people, right? So as a servant leader, right, as a person who serves others to really hopefully inspire them, I mean, it does make me feel successful or make me feel good. Like I've made an impact, right? Just like the same reason I went into the profession the first time with kids is now with adults is I want principals to say, because of you, you help me. I feel more confident. I feel more capable, right? I feel like I can do this job. I look forward to coming to work now. And so from that perspective, I feel like that helps me feel like I'm doing something right. The fact that we started a publishing company, we're giving people an opportunity to fulfill their dreams, right? To take authors who have never published a book and say, oh my God, again, it's constantly looking at ways to help people become better versions of themselves. And then the last point I would make, even in my own company, most of my associates are still practitioners, right? I know I'm not, so I surround myself with people who are still working principals, right? They're going to leave their building, go work with a school and go back to their building. And one of the things they say all the time, which I love is I love doing this because it helps me become a better principal. Because when I go into those schools, I have to question myself and reflect, am I doing the things that I'm asking them to do? And therefore it actually helps me. So at the end of the day, I want to inspire people to become better versions of themselves. And that's what I try to do. And hopefully in some small way, we're doing that a little bit, not just individually, but as a company as well.
Yeah, that is definitely a definition of success I can get behind, making a difference and inspiring others to be better. Listeners, the book is Culturize. I think I mispronounced that earlier, so
That's
I apologize,
all right.
Jimmy.
I know. That's all right.
Culturize. It's a tongue twister for me. It's pretty
It's
simple.
I just make up words, Tom. I just make up
well,
words all the time.
Why not? We might as well.
What the hell?
But I would definitely recommend that as a read. You can also follow Jimmy on Twitter and Instagram. The handle is @Casas_Jimmy. You'll find Jimmy Casas and Associates on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. The website is jimmycasas.com. And Jimmy, tell us a little bit about your other weekly YouTube show with Joe. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we just started us about a month ago. We've been talking about it for about a year, but it's like everything else, right? We got so many things going on. Like, when are we going to time to do a weekly show? I said, but if we call it a weekly show, that means we can do it anytime during the week, right? Because with our travel schedules and everything. But really, it was just an opportunity. And we talked about a podcast early on, but then we thought we kind of want to do a show. But really, it's just an opportunity, honestly, for Joe and I to get together. I don't get to see him enough, and we're really good friends, and we just want to spend some time together. And we thought, what do we have in common? Well, we love to talk about it, leadership. And so let's just start something. And also let's create a platform where people can come on the show and talk about the things they want to talk about too. And so, it's just something to do. And we're enjoying it, having fun. We're about a month into it. We've had like 4 or 5 episodes, and I feel like we're getting a pretty good following already. So we're having a good time. So hopefully helping someone along the way again.
Excellent. Fantastic. You'll find that on YouTube. Jimmy, this was great to have you here. Great to meet you. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. God bless, my friend.
Thank you.